right at the end of the class on Wednesday, the question was asked about Solomon's age. How old was he when he became king? Well, I just couldn't think that through. I kept thinking he was like 40, but that's just not right. And a little bit of looking and research on this, understanding first that Scripture doesn't tell us exactly how old he was. But anyone have some ideas? We didn't get to talk about that. It was right at the end of the class. Do they have any thoughts or ideas about his age when he became king? 20. And how do you know that? Just thought it out. Well, I mean, here's what we do know. I mean, because we've read a couple of texts, that he is, David prays for him that, my son, he is young and inexperienced. When Solomon, speaks with God, he acknowledges and says the same thing, he is young and inexperienced. Now, there are those who can kind of work out timelines much better than I can, trying to take certain markers that you have out there when someone becomes king and you subtract back to this and that. And still, nobody can say exactly how old Solomon was. Some kind of say maybe he was around 20. But there are those who say maybe as young as 14. He was from 14 to 20 years old. And that kind of seems to fit. Any idea how old he was when he died? Some said, well, David was 70, and we know that part for a fact. We don't know for sure on Solomon. Some say he was only 60.
I believe he reigned for 40 years.
He reigned for 40 years. That's the part we know. And so if he died at 60 and reigned for 40 years, that puts it at that 20 mark. Is where that comes from. So, I mean, that's about all we can say about that. We start speculating too much. But that's kind of where some have kind of worked that out to be. What we know for sure is that he was young and inexperienced. That's what he said, and that's what David said. And so when we get to this point here in a few minutes where he petitions God for discernment and wisdom, it kind of gives us a better inflection on why he was saying that, because he was kind of lost on what to do. He was young and inexperienced. But first, we've been studying about just the challenge of him getting to the throne. Though God had determined that it was going to be Solomon that would be on the throne, there were some challenges for him getting there. We were talking about that on Wednesday night. But finally, he is anointed. We'll be going here to 1 Kings chapter 2. Finally, he is anointed by Zadok and Nathan. He's presented to Israel. Israel accepted him well. They were excited. They were happy. And Adonijah, his half-brother who was trying to take the throne, well, that didn't work out, for him so well. So David, as we were in the class, David knew his time was near, and he was giving Solomon a lot of parting advice. Be strong and prove yourself a man, is what he said. And he counseled him to remember everything that God says. Observe all the things that God has said. And if Israel walks faithfully before God, they will have a king, have a man on the throne forever. And we've heard that how many times, as we've gone through generations now of Israelites. David had not forgotten those who have walked with him or those who have walked against him. And he called some out, Joab, and Shimei, and Barzillai, who, of course, he was one who walked with David and showed some kindness. And so David died, and his son sat on the throne. And so we get into chapter 2. Actually, we started in chapter 2 on Wednesday night. Adonijah still has an eye on the throne. Now, this is not going to work out well for him. We see very much this, well, at the least we could say he is a character flaw. That he knows that God has determined Solomon is the one to sit on the throne, and yet he still desires that. He still wants that. He's trying to work a way in the back door, to get this. In the middle part of 1 Kings chapter 2, you remember the storyline that is happening there, that he asks Bathsheba to go to Solomon and ask on his behalf for Abishag to become his wife. Now, who is Abishag? The nursemaid for David, or became his wife. There was not intimacy there, but would be considered David's wife. Why is that significant now? in view of this request? Why?
King gets the wives.
Yeah, the man who becomes king takes the wives of the king before. And so now we understand when Adonijah is asking for the wife of David, it would be viewed by some that, well, he is the appointed heir. You know, he was trying this back doorway in, to become king. And in chapter 2, verse 19, when Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, the king stood up to meet her, bowed to her, and sat down on his throne. He had a throne brought for the king's mother, and she sat down at his right hand. I just wanted to make sure we read that, and we get a picture of this. His respect for his mother, and that she's right there. And then also we can understand why Adonijah would have said to her, can you speak to Solomon for me? Because she can turn right there and speak to him. She was that close. She was able to do that. Verse 20, I have one small request to make of you. She said, do not refuse me. And the king replied, make it, my brother. I will not refuse you. And so she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah. Okay, so there's the request. So how's that going to go? What do we know about Solomon already at this point? He's just become king. But already we've seen how he's starting to deal with some things. How do you think this is going to go?
He's very strict and decisive. He can see through things.
We are going to see here in the next couple of chapters just how strict and decisive Solomon can be. And again, keeping in mind that this is a young man, inexperienced, how in the world does he know to be so strict and decisive? I mean, we haven't come to this point yet where he asks the Lord for wisdom and discernment. And yet we certainly see some of that in him already. So how does he know that?
This isn't necessarily an answer to your question right now, but...
Okay, mess me up then.
One of the things I think that has quickly established him as king is that he is just.
Okay.
He is serving justice.
Yes.
And I think, he shows that through all of these instances of serving justice to these people that
Yes.
and that's very quickly established in his kingdom.
He is just, and he's trying to make some judgments that demonstrate that and demonstrate a Godward movement in these things, I think. Go ahead.
Makes me think now his father's claims.
Okay.
He grew up in the palace with his father.
He grew up close to his father. He has seen how David has handled some things. Now, sometimes I'm hoping that Solomon has learned from some of David's poor decisions, too, because we can learn from bad decisions. I mean, if we make bad decisions, hopefully those are the ones we learn from the most. I'm never going to do that again. How many times have we said, right? But he has seen, how David has handled some things, and maybe even, and I think we've even thought this at times, that in some instances it has seemed that David was kind of soft on how he dealt with some things, particularly with his sons. And he has paid some price for that he has not disciplined his sons as he should. Maybe Solomon sees that and understands some of the problems that have come because of that. So, Solomon's response here, verse 22. King Solomon answered his mother, why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my older brother. Yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah. Okay, now why does he bring up these two? They weren't even in the discussion. Why does he bring up Abiathar and Joab? They were the ones who joined hands with Adonijah when he was trying to usurp the throne. All right, and so, yes, if we do this for Adonijah, why don't you just give him the throne? And look who he's going to bring with him. Solomon gets the big picture here. He sees what could happen here if this were to go forward. Verse 23, then King Solomon swore by the Lord, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who established me securely on the throne of my father David, and has founded a dynasty for me as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. So Solomon gave orders to Benaiah, son, and he struck down Adonijah. He died. So he's gone. He's died. He's taken care of that. So as that news spreads, what's Abiathar and Joab think? Yeah, they're scared. They know this is not going to go well for me. With Adonijah, being gone. So Solomon's response, his judgment is being made, very decisive. Looking just a little bit farther here, I'm not going to read all of these next verses, but now through verse 46 through the end of the chapter, he's dealing with some of these issues and these problems. Abiathar, he chose to stand with Adonijah. He was a priest. What lineage or what family was he from? Do you remember? Eli's family. Okay. What did the prophet tell? What did God tell Eli? We're thinking back a little bit. Eli had not disciplined his sons well. His sons were evil. Eli's sins were not taking care of the problems of his sons. What did God tell Eli? His descendants would not reach old age. And what we're going to see now is, Abiathar is going to be removed from the priesthood. No longer a priest. Okay. Fulfills promises that were made before. Solomon made Zadok the priest. And Joab had conspired with Adonijah. Now, what does he do? When he hears the news about Adonijah, being killed, what does Joab do? He's looking for sanctuary. Yeah, he runs to the altar and puts his hands on the altar, and of course Solomon tells Benaiah, now his commander, to go kill Joab. And Joab says, no, I'm not going with you. You can kill me right here. Benaiah seems to kind of take a second and goes back to Solomon and says, he's holding on to the altar. And Solomon says, what? Well, what does Solomon tell Benaiah to do? Go kill him. Kill him and bury him now. This is the decisive nature that we see now with Solomon. We see what he's going to do. Okay. And so, Shimei, here's another one in the latter part of chapter 2. Shimei was the one who cursed David. And on David's way back into Jerusalem, Shimei was trying to make up a little bit, but David remembered the curses of Shimei. And David put Shimei on house arrest, let's call it. He said, okay, you can stay here in Jerusalem. Have your home, your house here. Stay in Jerusalem. But if you leave Jerusalem, you'll surely die. Why do you suppose Solomon said, okay, you can stay here in Jerusalem. You can stay close to me. Why do you think he said that? Huh? Keep an eye on. I think that was it. Keep an eye on. After about 3 years, Shimei went out of town to take care of some business. When he came back, you know what happened? Solomon put him to death. He was no more. And what verse 46 says at the end of chapter 2, okay, it says, then the king gave the order to Benaiah, and he went out and he struck down Shimei and he killed him. The kingdom was now firmly established in Solomon's hands. And so we've kind of fast forwarded through some events and some things that have happened here. The kingdom is firmly established in Solomon's. Some time has taken place, right? For all these things to happen. And don't you imagine that a young king coming to the throne would have left Israel less than 100% confident that they had good leadership there? I mean, I can understand why Israel would have to have a little bit of time to gain some confidence in Solomon. But now we see, because it's been 3 years, now we see, the text says, that his role, his kingdom was firmly established. Other thoughts, comments you'd make? Yeah. Lance?
Just a side note, the place that Shimei went to was in Gath, where Achish was. That was where David had sought refuge so long ago. I think it's kind of ironic that he went there and came back. And like even now, the king feels he's kind of like sort of helping out Solomon because he went there and now he has the excuse to deal with him.
Yeah, he's going to deal with him. And so, the interesting thing is to think about a little bit. These actions are not Solomon just acting for himself. I hope we can see there's a bigger picture here than Solomon. We have to remember that. He's not just trying to get revenge on David's enemies. I can see that, but it's a bigger picture than that. He was king. And not only was he king, but he was a civil leader. He had responsibilities to take care of the kingdom. But bigger than that, he was enforcing God's laws. He was the king anointed by God over Israel, the people of God. And so there was some judgment here that Solomon meted out. There was punishment for murder. Joab. He looked at Joab simply as being a murderer. Punishment for Shimei. Was it just the idea Shimei was cursing David? Well, we've all had some instance where someone has been ugly to us. Worthy of murder? What was different about this? Huh? There's this challenge of his kingship. But the bigger picture of that is he's not just any king. He's God's anointed king. You see, that's the bigger picture of that. It was a challenge to the king that God had in place. And I think that's key for us to think about just a little bit. Let's move into chapter 3 here. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh in Egypt. Well, that's not so unusual, really. Oh, I'm behind here. In chapter 3, made this alliance with the Pharaoh in Egypt. He married his daughter. That also was not so unusual. Often an alliance or a treaty was sealed with a marriage arrangement. And, we might look at Solomon and think, well, this is kind of a diplomatic move. That's what brought this on. What do we think about the diplomacy of Solomon in this? He's marrying someone from a foreign country, foreign gods. What do we think about Solomon's diplomacy?
I think on the one hand, looking at it from a worldly, secular point of view, it's very admirable. He's getting a treaty with one of the most powerful nations at the time. But looking at it from God's point of view, we should have trusted in God for that. Okay, I think this is a point. From the world view, other leaders would think, Solomon's ahead of the game. He knows how to go out and make treaties and to make alliances with other countries. And of course, the custom would be, the Pharaoh says, here's my favorite daughter. You marry her. And so some would look at that and think like, wow, he's quite the diplomat. But I think we have to look at the bigger picture here. Where is the trust and confidence? Is it in making these treaties with other countries, or is it placing confidence in God as being the one who is going to provide? And we have to think about, part of this treaty was marrying this daughter of Pharaoh. They worshipped pagan gods. And in fact, Solomon, we're going to see, has a number of wives over time. And what is the temptation that is going to come from his wives? These foreign gods. It's going to be what pulls Solomon down and what draws him away from Jehovah God.
Even as far back as Moses, the whole tribe of Israel
Go back in history and the times that God has already counseled and already has said, don't marry foreign wives. You know, this is going to be a temptation, and this is going to draw you away from me. And so this is going to come back around to be a problem. Now, Solomon worshipped God, as in Jehovah God, in verse 2. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the statutes of his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. So he would go to some of the same places of worship of those who are worshiping the pagan gods. Now, he would go there to worship Jehovah God, but you know, well, you tell me.
People looking at it from outside.
What do we see there as being a problem? And even, what are some applications that we need to make? I mean, he's worshiping Jehovah God, okay? But the way he's going about, tell me, what are some applications that we need to consider?
It makes it look totally different.
What's that? It needs to look different? Ben?
Well, we can't just, there's no such thing as just halfway serving him. We've gotten to 40 minutes.
Okay. You cannot halfway serve God. Okay, that doesn't work.
I find it ironic that Solomon asked for wisdom and God gave him wisdom. He was one of the most wise kings of his time. But during this time, he was not wise. And I wonder if, and this is just speculation, but did he become wise in his own eyes?
Okay. So, I mean, he has made some good judgments. We've seen some wisdom from the young man. This is not a wise move here. He's not yet asked God for that wisdom. That hasn't come yet. But even after he does receive wisdom from God, he still makes some decisions like this. I mean, he doesn't stop his alliances with those who worship pagan gods.
For him to be worshiping God, he needs to do it in the way God has said. That is not the way God wants.
If we are going to worship God, we have to do it in the way he says to do it. You know, we can go about what we think is this is a good way to worship God. We're still trying to worship Jehovah God, but we're doing it in a way that we think is best. When God has given directions to do it this way, that is never going to be right. That is never going to work to our benefit. That is never going to make us stronger in faith. You know, this applies to us just as well and just as strongly as the issue here with Solomon 3,000 years ago. We cannot worship God in whatever way we think is best. God cannot accept that. Tim?
When Israel rejected God as their king, God warned them, this king is going to be like other kings. And I think we see that in Solomon right here.
We will.
He's looking exactly like the kings of the world.
He is doing some of the things that the kings of the world would do, more so than David did. And this is exactly what God foretold long ago, you know, when they said, we want a king. We want to be like the other nations. Okay, you can have a king, and you can be like other nations. But this is not going to work out well for you. And as we've said, we come to the end of Solomon's reign, and we work into the time of the divided kingdom. It's the beginning of the end. It's really what is coming there. So there must have been places for worship in Jerusalem because there was a priest on duty there. And there was still at Gibeon, there was the tabernacle that was set up there. Okay, so it's not like there was no place for Solomon to go to worship. He could have worshiped in an appropriate place in Jerusalem, and he did not. He could have gone to Gibeon here and worshipped at the tabernacle. You know, it was still there. It was still in place. The priests were on duty there. But he didn't do that. So this is just a a picture of the city of David long ago. David had a buddy who had a drone, and he went up real high and got this picture for us, I guess. And, accurate to the time, except it looks like the temple is already built. And, of course, we haven't come to the building of the temple quite yet. It's being prepared for. But even today, in Jerusalem, you can still kind of walk around the remnants of the wall of the city of David. Of course, we've looked at some pictures where, Jerusalem now, surrounds this, and the wall continues way up here, and like this, the wall of the city of Jerusalem. But just trying to get our mindset and getting a picture in our mind when we look at the old city of Jerusalem or the city of David, this is the size, this is what it would be. And so if this is, this would be the city of David, what is this valley right here? What's that called? Kidron Valley. This is the Kidron Valley. And so this hillside over here, the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane, just getting our bearings straight. We'll have a lot more of that as we continue and as we go forward. Okay, still going on in chapter 3. Solomon goes to Gibeon, where the tabernacle is at, and God speaks to him. Chapter 3 and verse 4. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. All right, just incredible scene. We can kind of imagine where this happens, the location of this, and how God appears to Solomon. There are 3 occasions where God appears to Solomon, speaks to him in this way. In chapter 9, we see it again, and the last time is in chapter 11. But I just want this to sink in for a moment. God appeared to Solomon. Solomon was at the right place. He was worshiping in the right way. There's been 1,000 sacrifices. If we can even imagine that, which is pretty hard, 1,000 sacrifices being made. Verse 6, Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on the throne this very day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? And the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. What an incredible thing. We talk sometimes about the wisdom of Solomon, how God blessed him. This is it. This is the occasion. And for us to understand that it was Solomon who petitioned God. Here's what I need. I'm young and I'm inexperienced. How can I possibly lead this great nation, these people of yours? Help me to have discernment. I really like that part. When he talks about it and he asks for having a discerning heart. The word or the term is used sometimes in Scripture. It applies to us too. In Hebrews chapter 5 and going into chapter 6, the early Christians that the writer was addressing were admonished that they had not grown in such a way that they could discern right from wrong. They didn't know good from evil. And the point was, what the writer is saying is that you should know, you ought to know, but you should be teaching others, but you can't, because you yourself, you can't even discern good from evil. And so you think about Solomon asking for this, and I hope that even in our prayers and our requests to God, that we are praying for understanding that we will know his will, that we pray for discernment. Help us to understand right from wrong. Help us to make good decisions. This is what Solomon was asking for. It was exactly what he needed as king, for sure, the king of God's people, but for any of us to have a relationship with God. Here's what we need. We can learn this from Solomon. Other thoughts? Comments you would have?
On discernment, I kind of see two things to that, exactly what you're saying. It's important, and we need to have it, because if we don't have discernment, if we don't have understanding, we are either confused, and nobody likes to be confused. It's not good. We should be learning and growing in the truth of the word. Or we are deceived by what we think is right, and we're actually doing the wrong thing. I can't help but think of the verse of, many will call on me and say, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name and all these good works? Yet,
Yes.
workers of iniquity. So we have that fear of either just not understanding or even thinking we're understanding correctly, and we're not. And so we have to have true discernment to be able to stay away from other those and have discernment.
And I'm not sure which is worse, to have that fear of understanding. I don't know what to do, or to think we know what's right when we really don't. I mean, the end result of both of those scenarios is not good. We're separated from God, whether it's by ignorance or whether it's because, no, I think I got this worked out. I think I know what God wants, when we actually don't, because we don't know what he says. In both cases, it's not a good ending to that. Discernment and understanding of God's will is what we need. Let's read from verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both riches and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in my ways and obey my statutes and commands as David your father did, I will give you long life. And Solomon woke up and realized it was a dream. Think of a couple of points here maybe that kind of stands out to this. He said, I'll give you a wise and discerning heart. He acknowledges, Solomon, you didn't ask for selfish things. And because of that, you're going to be blessed. There's not going to be anyone like you. And then he promised, riches like no one else has. And if you obey my commands, I will give you a long life. Did Solomon receive that blessing? He did not. He did not live a long life. And it's not any failure on the part of God. God held up his side of the deal. Solomon did not. Such an interesting story that takes place right after this, beginning in verse 16. Solomon's wisdom is put to the test. And there's this issue, there's this dilemma. Two prostitutes come before him, come to his court. And if we can picture, I'm not exactly sure what Solomon's court looked like, what the throne scene was. But typically, in any remnants that's been found, you get the idea of there being a throne kind of up on a stage, and there are those his court sits around him. And there are just those days where the king has to sit on his throne, and he has to hear problem after problem and complaint and make judgments. Imagine this one. Two prostitutes come in, and there's a dead baby and there's a baby that's alive. But the dispute about to whom does the baby that's living belong to? And imagine hearing this. They both have their story, and their stories are different. Either one of the stories could be right. One of the stories is true, one of them is a lie. How do you know? I mean, how would we know? We're just listening to the story. You have to make some judgment from this. And so Solomon has an idea. Finish the story for me. What did Solomon do? called for a sword. Imagine this. And what did he say? Huh?
Cut the baby in half and split it up.
Yeah.
And he was counting on the fact that the true mother wouldn't let that happen. And that's why he offered.
How did he know? Yeah. I mean, how did he know how this would come out? You know, soldier, bring your sword. Take this baby that's alive, cut it in half. Give half to this one and half to this one. How did he know that the real mother would just fall to her knees and say, no, 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 no. Give the baby to this one here. How did he know?
I think he could tell by the sincerity of the real mother.
When the real mother said, no, no, take the baby and give it to her, that answered the question. You see, it solved the dilemma. And a lot of boldness, didn't it? A lot of confidence that he was making the right application here, saying the right thing. And verse 28 says, when all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. You know, in a lot of ways, I read that and I think, here's where Solomon became king. Yeah, I know, he was already on the throne. He was already king. But here was the point when Israel all had confidence that they could look at Solomon and they could say, he's our king. This was kind of a turning point, I think, in that way. Solomon's wisdom. Other thoughts here. Our time is just about to roll out here. Other comments you want to make here before the class closes out? Anything else? So we get into chapter 4. Chapter 4 doesn't take so much time to cover, really. We're going to work on that and finish that out a little bit on Wednesday night. Wednesday night's kind of a review night. Now, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to review or how we're going to handle Wednesday night yet. I'm not sure. But we do have to finish up chapter 4. And looking at the load going on after our review night, we might start working on chapter 5 some as well. Okay? So kind of read through chapter 5 and let's be ready for that on Wednesday night. Very glad that you're here. Thank you for coming this morning.